Shattered glass, Julian Reed scrolled through his emails with disinterest until one particular name caught his eye. Bianca Thornton, the woman who had walked away from him 5 years ago when his tech startup was struggling, claiming she needed stability, only to marry a venture capitalist 3 months later. Now her name was attached to a glossy invitation for the annual Thornton Foundation art auction, the social event of the season. Julian's finger hovered over the delete button before a different impulse took hold. He had fantasized about this moment for years, imagining the look on Bianca's face when he walked in as the success she hadn't believed he could become. Whiskey Diamond, his app that revolutionized rare spirits authentication, had made him worth 9 figures almost overnight. The press called him a visionary. Bianca had called him a dreamer, and not in the complimentary sense. Perfect, he murmured, accepting the invitation. He had everything he needed for his triumphant return, except for one crucial element: the right woman on his arm. 2 days later, Julian found himself in a small, cluttered office at the Westlake Gallery, where his friend Thomas had arranged a meeting with Valerie Winters. According to Thomas, she was the gallery's rising star curator with an encyclopedic knowledge of contemporary art, knowledge Julian desperately needed if he was going to navigate Bianca's pretentious auction without looking like an imposter. "Mr. Reed," Valerie said as she entered, extending her hand, "I understand you need an art consultant." Julian had expected someone intimidating, perhaps a severe, black-clad intellectual with sharp edges. Instead, Valerie had warm brown eyes, that crinkled when she smiled, and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put him at ease. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and she wore a burgundy dress that seemed practical rather than showy. "Call me Julian," he said, studying her, "and I need more than a consultant. I need a date." Valerie's smile cooled several degrees. "I'm not for hire in that capacity." "You misunderstand," Julian clarified quickly. "I need someone who understands the art world to accompany me to the Thornton Foundation auction, someone who can speak intelligently about the pieces and help me not look completely out of my depth." "That's still not typically what I do," Valerie said, leaning against her desk. "I'm a curator, not an escort service." $5,000 for one evening, Julian said. "Plus whatever you want to bid on at the auction within reason." Valerie raised an eyebrow. "That's an obscene amount for a few hours of my time." "I have obscene amounts to spare," Julian replied with a shrug. "And I'm not asking you to do anything inappropriate. Just be yourself, charming, knowledgeable, and impressive." "Why is this so important to you?" Valerie asked, curiosity overcoming her initial resistance. Julian hesitated, then decided on a half-truth. "The hostess is an important potential investor. I want to make a good impression." Valerie studied him for a long moment, and Julian had the distinct impression she saw more than he intended to show. "Make it a donation to our community arts program instead of a payment to me, and I'll consider it," she said finally. "And I pick my own dress." Julian smiled, relieved. Done. What Julian didn't tell her was that he had researched her thoroughly before this meeting. Valerie Winters had a reputation for transforming the stuffy Westlake Gallery into a space that welcomed emerging artists from diverse backgrounds. She was respected, connected, and, most importantly for his purposes, exactly the type of woman who would make Bianca Thornton insecure. As Valerie showed him out, Julian caught a glimpse of a painting in her office, a striking abstract piece featuring shattered glass, being reassembled into something beautiful. It struck him as oddly prophetic for what he was planning. 1 week until the auction, Valerie reminded him at the door. "I hope you know what you're getting into, Mr. Reed." So did he. Gallery of Pretense, the Thornton Foundation art auction, transformed the historic Blackwell Hotel into a temple of wealth and culture. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over the curated crowd, while white-gloved servers wove through, clusters of San Francisco's elite with trays of champagne and whores. D'oeuvres that cost more than most people's weekly. Groceries. Julian adjusted his custom Armani jacket as he and Valerie entered the grand ballroom. He'd been surprised when she arrived at his penthouse in a midnight blue gown that managed to be both elegant and understated. No flashy designer labels or excessive jewelry, just impeccable taste. Her only adornment was a vintage silver bracelet that she mentioned had belonged to her grandmother. Nervous? Valerie asked, accepting 2 champagne flutes from a passing server and handing one to Julian. Not at all, he lied, scanning the room for Bianca. Just calculating how much this display of excess could have funded actual art programs. Valerie smiled. A fair point. Though tonight's proceeds will support arts education in underserved schools. Even performative philanthropy can do real good. Before Julian could respond, he spotted her, Bianca Thornton, resplendent in emerald silk. Her blonde hair twisted into an elaborate updo that showcased the diamond earrings he once couldn't afford to give her. Beside her stood Preston Thornton, her silver-haired husband, at least 20 years her senior but powerful in the way only old money could be. Target acquired, Julian murmured, placing his hand lightly on Valerie's lower back and guiding her toward a nearby installation. Valerie glanced between Julian and Bianca, her expression sharpening with understanding. Ah, so that's why we're here. The important investor is your ex. Julian had the decency to look slightly abashed. Is it that obvious? To anyone paying attention, Valerie said, taking a deliberate sip of champagne. You might as well have revenge date tattooed on your forehead. Instead of being offended, Julian laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even him. Well, since we've established my transparent motives, shall we make this worth the donation to your community arts program? Something shifted in Valerie's expression, not disapproval, but a kind of amused challenge. I suppose I did agree to help you navigate this world. Just remember, Mr. Reed, I'm playing a role tonight. But that doesn't mean I'll play it by your script. For the next hour, Julian watched in fascination as Valerie transformed the evening. She moved through the auction with natural grace, engaging effortlessly with critics, collectors, and artists. She didn't name-drop or flaunt knowledge. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that drew people in, making each person feel uniquely valued. When they finally encountered Bianca and Preston, Julian felt a surge of satisfaction at Bianca's poorly concealed shock. Julian, she said, her voice a perfect blend of surprise and forced warmth. I didn't expect to see you here. Bianca, Preston, Julian nodded. I wouldn't miss it. The Thornton Foundation's reputation precedes it. This is Valerie Winters, curator at Westlake Gallery. Preston brightened. The Winters behind the Breaking Boundaries exhibition? Brilliant work. You're too kind, Valerie said with genuine warmth, though I can only take credit for recognizing talent, not creating it. As the conversation flowed, Julian realized something unsettling. The revenge fantasy he'd nurtured for years was playing out perfectly. Bianca's eyes kept darting between him and Valerie with growing curiosity, her smile tightening each time Preston directed another question toward Valerie. Yet Julian found himself increasingly disinterested in Bianca's reaction. Instead, he was captivated by how Valerie's face animated when discussing an emerging sculptor's work, how she deflected a condescending comment from another patron with graceful wit, how she remembered the name of every server who approached them. This wasn't the performance he'd anticipated. There was an authenticity to her that made everyone else in the room seem like they were trying too hard. The Monet in your foyer is exquisite, Valerie was saying to Preston. Is it a family acquisition? As Preston launched into the painting's provenance, Bianca touched Julian's arm, drawing him slightly aside. She's lovely, Bianca said, her eyes calculating. How long have you been together? We're still discovering that ourselves, Julian replied, surprised to find he wasn't entirely lying. Across the room, the auctioneer called for attention, and Valerie glanced back at Julian with a genuine smile that sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. As they moved toward their seats, Julian realized with growing discomfort that the evening's script had changed. He had planned for triumph, for vindication, for Bianca's envy. He hadn't planned for his own distraction. for the way his attention kept returning to Valerie not as his prop, but as a person increasingly fascinating to him. The auction was beginning, but Julian Reed was already losing control of the plot he'd so carefully constructed.